You are listening to the Bat Flip Podcast, a baseball podcast from Belly Up Sports and the Belly Up Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Damian and Matt.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Bat Flip Podcast. My name is Damian, here with my co-host Matt, coming to you on March 1st of 2022. So we are going to talk about the CBA negotiations this week and the announcement today of Rob Manfred of canceling regular season games. We had a CEO/owner step down this week, and then we'll jump into our NL team's favorite players. Last week we did the AL, so we're going to jump to the NL this week. But before we get to all of that, how are you doing, Matt?
I'm doing pretty good. Living life. Got some cool stuff going on right now, and had a fun weekend. I was out at a friend's bachelor trip, so that was cool. It's a little bit of an unhealthy weekend, so I'm kind of getting back to my normal routine now. But yeah, it's everything's good. How about yourself?
Doing all right. Just I was hoping the negotiations this weekend would give me a little bit bigger of a smile on my face, but NASCAR's back, and so I really enjoyed watching this weekend. The new car, it actually really impressed me at Fontana this week. It put on a fantastic race, and then just working on little things behind. If you'll see one of the things I was working on and behind the scenes, if you're listening to this on the YouTube side, we have a new graphic over there. And on the podcast side, you guys won't see it, but go check out the YouTube. You can see it there. So that's gonna be the new background until we're ready for the face cams. But just little things like that, just hanging out and getting little things done. So ready to jump into this public clowning of Rob Manfred, at least on my side. But before we jump to Rob Manfred, we'll talk about Derek Jeter. Actually stepped down from his role of CEO of the Miami Marlins and actually is, letting go of his role of the ownership as well.
Yeah, this was a pretty surprising move. I don't think this had really been rumored at all or anything that Derek Jeter was rather either on the hot seat slash, not happy there. Now, in the future, I don't know exactly what happened there, but I don't really think it matters all that much. Jeter is somebody who's very inexperienced as an executive, and I don't really think he did all that much to help them out. I don't think he really hurt them that much, but he traded away a lot of good players, and they were kind of rebuilding, and it seemed like they had kind of gotten to a point where they could start to buy a little bit, maybe start to turn the corner. But I guess he just decided that he didn't really want to do it. It's kind of tough when you're used to being a Yankee, and now you are on the Marlins, who out of all the revenue talk we've had about Major League Baseball with the CBA stuff, the Marlins might be a team that's legitimately got revenue problems. So because nobody goes to their games and nobody cares. So I think he's just doesn't really see eye to eye with everybody there. And honestly, I didn't think Derek Jeter as an executive was going to work out too well to start with, and it seems like it probably is actually ended before it could really turn into a disaster. But it wasn't great. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. I don't know what their situation's going to be. I don't know if they end up promoting Kim Ing as who's the general manager there to become oversee all of baseball operations, or if they go make an outside hire or what. But I guess we're going to have a lot of time to find out about that because there's nothing going on right now. So.
Yeah, so they did say that as of right now, Kim Ing will be the final shot caller per se. Usually she took everything and then ran it through Jeter, but now she's going to get full control of that. So the plan is, at least right now, and I guess for the foreseeable future, because they said they don't see hiring anybody in that place. Kim Ing will be able to take that over, but it's like you said. I think that he's kind of saw other things that were happening behind the scenes, and just they didn't have the same vision of what was going to happen. And it was really interesting because after the news broke that he was stepping down, it came out of nowhere, and then like a bunch of players were just like, they went to social media and they took their time and made a post about it, and it kind of seemed like, because it was on it was Monday. It was on Monday. That he kind of was doing this in like a move to stand with the players through everything that was happening with the CBA. At least that's how I kind of took it, based on like whatever all of the players were saying. It wasn't just like a normal executive kind of like step down. It really seemed like, the players at least knew something that, maybe the general public didn't, at least. So that it did make it a little interesting. And I did think it was a little too soon, because, too soon for him to step down, because he had really seemed to be involved with everything enough to, they were just starting to build this around the right way and get to that point where they had a bunch of good pitching prospects. Their young team was getting ready and they could spend some money and really make it a competitor. And I really felt that was like when Jeter was going to help them take that next step. And be able to be a key person to, get free agents to want to come to Miami and get people to come out to the park again and stuff. So it is interesting to see that he steps down and what his new, his next move is, because there has been some rumors even since he stepped down that, he might be looking to get into broadcasting, even maybe with an ESPN or something. So will be interesting to see the next step that Derek Jeter takes. But, you had alluded to it right there with not much going on. And I guess now's a good time as ever to jump into this last week of chaos that we've really seen with the CBA talks.
Yeah, so this last week was it was a whirlwind with the CBA talks, and it really didn't end well. Looking at the past week, there was just, the first. When did they start? It was like last Monday they
It was
started.
Monday, yeah.
Yeah, so they honestly they didn't do anything at all. They didn't even attempt to make progress until like Friday or Saturday. And then it seemed like their numbers got a little bit closer together and they ended up eventually agreeing on some things. But the final values on their terms were way, way, way apart still as of yesterday. And there was a little bit of optimism being reported last night that they could have maybe get a deal going, and they actually extended their deadline, which was originally the end of February 28th, so the end of the month of February, to not cancel games. They eventually extended that to 5 o'clock today. I think it was 5 Eastern today,
Yeah.
and but obviously it didn't come to fruition. And I think the ownership said that they thought that the deal was going to happen, but that the players' tone changed. The players said that wasn't true, and that they were never very close, and that any optimism was either just misreading the room or intentionally misleading people. Which I don't know which case that is. It could be either one, I guess. But fact of the matter is that after 2.5 months of not even attempting to talk, and then a full week of, well, 5 days of being closer to each other but not talking, and then 2 days of what appeared to have been talking, have resulted in nothing. So maybe the sides got a little bit closer together on terms and stuff, but I mean, because it's not like the $10 million to $115 million difference anymore. It's more like a 40 to 85 million or 30 to $85 million difference now. But it didn't come to. And today, Manfred announced that the first two series of the season, so I guess the first 6 games ish, were canceled. So wonderful. Here we are.
Yeah, here we are. So you alluded to some of the things they did agree on, were it was going to be a draft lottery, and that was going to be the top 5 teams, is something that they had basically agreed upon. They had agreed upon to expanded playoffs up to 12 teams. The owners wanted 14. The players really pushed it off, so the owners did settle for 12. So we get 2 more additional teams in. So now 6 from each side. And then I believe there was some other stuff to deal with. The players ended up dropping all of their asking for Super 2 arbitration. They made that just stay the same at 22% of those players. They had agreed to the old basic CBA penalty system. I think there was just a minor tweak to maybe the first level. It jumped from, I think, like 30% to like 32.5 or something like that. I could be wrong, but it was really similar to the old penalty scale from the previous CBA. And then just the other stuff some of the stuff they got close to was like the minimum salary deal. The owners finally got up to 700,000. And actually looking at from what Passon had reported right after this, the players were at 725. So there's about $25,000 difference there. But there's also a difference about the per year. The owners wanted to go up 10,000 per year, while the players want 20,000 per year in that. So that is close. They could make a deal pretty easy on that. If you just agree to 700 at 20 per year, or you go to 725 and 10 per year, I'm sure you can get a deal done on that easily. The big two issues are going to be the luxury tax thresholds and the pre-arb bonus pool. The owners finally came up to at least 30 million. The players are looking for 85 million and an increase of 5 million per year. They did finally get to the 150 players overall. The owners were trying to offer, bigger sum per player, and the association or the union really wanted more players with money. So they did get to 150 players, but there's still a decent gap there between the actual number that those players are going to get, and then the thresholds. The owners want to start at 220 now. That would be a $10 million jump from what it was last year, but they want to keep that for 3 seasons and then jump up to 224 and then 230 at the end of the luxury or the CBA. And the players want to start this year at 238. So they want to start 8 million over what the owners want to end at next year or at the end of the deal. And the players want to get up to 263 million at the end of that, of the 5-year deal.
Yeah, so looking at this as a whole, and there were a few other things that were mentioned. We'll talk about in a few minutes about what Manfred said today about kind of day-to-day baseball rules and stuff. But a couple of the other things were my thoughts on this, at least, were that I think this is kind of a broken system in general, and that the the luxury tax is not a good system. It really isn't. And honestly, this issue is, they're still so far apart. This issue is going to not be easily resolved because, I mean, the owners really needed to step up. I mean, they maybe could have gotten something where the first year or two were lower, like they had planned, like a 220 type number for year one, but they would have had to step it up more per year than they wanted to, and obviously the players are not going to go for what the ownership offered. Um, and on the other end too, I mean, you look at the pre-arb pool and stuff. I mean, it's both. The offers are so far apart that nobody's going to take them, and to me, that just doesn't make sense. Why you would even offer them? I mean, really, like at this point, it just doesn't make sense. They know ownership knows the players aren't going to accept the deal they offered, and the players know that ownership's not going to accept the deal they offered. So this is where we're at, and I mean, honestly, I really am starting to get to the point to where I think that something drastic has to be, proposed. Something like like a hard cap with a really high spending floor type thing that maybe they can limit the upper end team's spending. But, teams like the Rays and the Marlins can't get away with spending $40 million in a season anymore. That's something that maybe in the long maybe helps both sides. Honestly, that would help the players. I mean, they would make more money overall if that was the case. And from an ownership side, you keep that competitive balance, and you have um, you keep teams from just rising up into that over the luxury tax and stuff. I mean, it's something that could maybe be worked out, but this is also something that should have been started months ago. I mean, kind of negotiating that and seeing what kind of structure they could put in for that. And then you look at some of the other little things too. I know Manfred said today that he had put in or that the owners had put in like pitch clocks and banning the shift.
and
and
bigger
he wanted
bases.
and bigger bases as reasons to as part of the offer, which I truly don't understand why that would be in a CBA for one thing, and also the fact that he's trying to make it the fans. He honestly thinks the fans want that, and that's not even true. The fans don't even want the expanded playoffs.
No,
So I mean, I don't understand why that would be the case. I don't understand why they think that would be a good thing, and I don't know why that would even be a bargaining chip. I don't think the players especially want that. I think some players probably want to ban the shift, but a lot of players don't. I
Joey
mean,
Votto does.
Joey Votto does. I mean, Joey Gallo does.
Oh,
Um,
Joey Gallo. Yeah, that's what I
yeah,
meant to say.
Joey Votto might too. He gets shifted a lot, but I mean, a lot of pitchers probably don't. I mean, um, and you look at like the bigger bases. I don't even know why that's even a thing. Like it doesn't make much sense. But pitch clocks, I don't think would even matter at the end of the day. Like I watch college baseball, and you don't even notice they're there. So
No.
I don't think that even makes any sense at all. But I mean, it is what it is. So, but at the end of the day, like we're at a point where we had a deadline, and I know it's an arbitrary deadline, but at the same time, I don't have a super big problem with a deadline like that because the only way to fix this is urgency. And regardless of which side needs to come to an agree, needs to better their offer. And at a certain point, like you need that urgency, and kind of a BS deadline probably isn't going to create that urgency. So, I don't know if they're going to have another deadline for canceling more games. I don't know if they say, like, well, if March 15th comes around and, which is 2 weeks from now, also my birthday, if it comes around and we don't have a deal by then, we're going to cancel 6 more games or something. I don't know if that's what's going to happen or what. Obviously, we'll have to have some kind of preparation for the season, whether it's a week or a couple weeks of spring training type thing. I know the players are going to have the players are going to have a somewhat of a training site in Arizona, and I think they're trying to get one together in Florida. I don't know if it's come together yet, but I mean, maybe they have another, and the players can get somewhat ready, and then just have to have a couple weeks of tune up for the season. Obviously, another big thing too is there's a lot of free agents out there still that are going to have to be finalized. So you look at like it's going to take more than 2 weeks. So honestly, realistically, a month out. I know it's an arbitrary deadline, and people have been kind of calling it that, but with all the free agents that need to sign and a full real tune up for the season, spring training wise, um, it's gonna be it would be tough to do much shorter than a month. For preparation for a full 162 game season. Now, when you
Well,
shorten the season some, you don't need as many games to get ready, but it's kind of one of those things.
yeah, so the league has already said, at least at this moment, that they aren't going to plan on rescheduling games. That these games missed are what they are, and they will not be paid for it. Now, the players have already come back and said, "Well, look, we're not going to agree to a deal unless we're getting paid for our 162 game season." And there's been stuff in the past where, hey, like Manfred wanted to do 154 games last year, but we'd still pay you for 162. Like just little things like that. So that all happens. But there was some talk, at least coming into the deadline, that the players had pretty much told them, based off the 2020 season, that the 3 weeks that they had leading up was a little too short, of a timeline to really get fully ready. So that's where MLB is going on the assumption of something around the 24 to 25 day mark, is what's actually needed for a camp until regular season games could be started. That's kind of where they're at as an arbitrary number. Now that could be a day or two, on each side. Like today is 23 days, I think it was, until um, when they would have had some. It was some 23-day mark. I forget exactly what it was for, but so I would assume within the next like week, you're looking at they would have to have something. They say that no sessions are scheduled to renegotiate now, but it kind of looks like that may pick up on Thursday again. They're going to take Wednesday and kind of debrief with each side. But like you'd said, they had 15 hours worth of meetings yesterday. And then, I think there was like 11 different or 12 different sessions yesterday. And then there was, 3 or 4 today. And MLB called their offer today their best and final offer. And I don't know if that was best and final for canceling games or if that was best and final of like, well, we're all going to just take some more time on this, or what that actually means. But, you're looking at a thing of where the next, week and a half is going to be very, very important to decide, how many more games we get, because it doesn't seem right now that MLB has a willingness to reschedule any games at all, and they're just going to let the schedule kind of play out with how it is and how many they keep canceling. Which I would still be wary of getting a deal done within the next week and a half, and that mattering at all, anyways, because of the tone from each side.
Right, and I'm sitting here thinking, this is going to be the problem with having the first few games canceled. This is about to snowball,
Yep.
because once some games are canceled, that becomes a thing that obviously it was willing. The players and the owners were willing to cancel games without taking a deal that wasn't in their favor, supposedly, and they were so with that on the table, they didn't come to an agreement. So obviously, they're stuck into their sides enough to where they believe it's worth it to cancel some games, and how many games. I don't think they really care. I mean, honestly, I really don't think they care how many games get canceled, if
No,
as long as their side wins whatever they want. So that's the problem I have, is they're dug in enough to cancel some games. There's no end to how many games they're willing to cancel.
No, especially from the player side. I think the owners will get a sense of urgency probably near the end of April. April is the lowest grossing month in baseball in general. Like once you start getting into May and then close, getting into the summertime, that's when your revenues and everything really start picking up. So I think that's when the owners will start kind of noticing it more. The players, which is something I didn't know until I was doing some more digging in, they've withheld 100% of their licensing revenues for multiple years now, like 3 or 4 years. 100% of that's been held back for this case. So players will still get, I mean, obviously it's still not going to be their full salary, but they will still get paid. So that just tells you like they've been preparing for multiple years for this to be a thing. And there's been the sentiment around that the players are, they're willing to play, but they're also willing to lose the entire season if that's the case. And I wouldn't be very happy with that, and I would look frowned upon the players in that scenario. Like if they do say like, hey, we'll just like screw the season, but it does show that they are willing to hold out and wait until they feel that they get something, that's great for them. Like I think they've just kind of had enough of being taken to the woodshed too many times.
Yeah, I mean it's a situation where I really think it's. I mean, I've been optimistic about it the whole time, thinking that they would probably come together on something eventually, because the general structure was there, but the numbers were really far apart. But at that, once they had some urgency to not cancel games, that they would eventually kind of meet in the middle somewhere. And obviously, that didn't even come close to happening. So, I mean, we're gonna. I have a feeling that we're not seeing any baseball till at least May, and probably
Yeah.
longer than that. I mean, I really, it's frustrating to me. And um, I think that there's some reasons that, I mean, that could be in the long run. I mean, in the long run, honestly, and I know the players want to get their deal that they, feel like they deserve, and they probably do deserve. But in the long run, I think it just hurts everybody in baseball. I mean, this whole thing, you can blame who you want to. I mean, the owners have been ridiculous, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It's just going to hurt everybody in baseball, and it stinks to see.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just, it's one of those things where it's like 1994 all over again. And obviously, you don't want to, if you end up agreeing this week and you miss the first 6 games of the year or something, then it's like whatever. But at the end of the day, like if you end up with a 60 game season and another kind of whatever kind of postseason, like it's just not good. So
Yeah, and I think my whole the real disappointment that I have is that from we're so close off of the 2020 season where we dealt with a 60 game season, and then you had all of the owners out there crying and pleading that they had lost so much money and they had to do all these layoffs and they have to cut minor league teams and they have to do all this because they can't afford to pay it. And then and then 2021 comes around and we had one of the best baseball seasons ever from both sides. It really felt like baseball got its mojo, it got its momentum back, and then we hit into this stonewall again. Like, and we're gonna go right back to it seems like at least a shortened season right now, but how short is that going to get? Are we going to get to another 2020 year and then we're gonna have to hear about it for the next 3 years on or whatever about
no,
how
it would
you
be
know
longer than 3 years we'd hear about it. I mean, this is one of those, like in 1994, and I know I have family members that were baseball fans before 1994 and haven't watched another game. I mean, I
well
know that that's going to happen.
I'm not talking about from the fans' perspective. I'm talking about from the owner's perspective, like how they were the whole 2020 season, how much outcry we got, how much it affected them, and then if we come to that again, are we going to have to hear it from their side for the next like 3 years? Like, oh hey, like look, we've been affected 2020, and then we had a little bit of a bounce back in 21, but then 2022 happened and this whole lockout deal, and now we're just suffering so much more. Like we weren't able to rebound all the way from 2020, and then now it's happened to us again, and that's what I really feel like is going to be an issue. Like
Well,
I feel like this is going to be a snowball effect for the owners on one side to say how much it has affected them, and I feel like that would hurt the game more than anything that they're doing at the bargaining table at this moment, because they will eventually get to a deal. Like a deal will be made. We'll get some sort of a season, I'm sure, once we get to the number that the players are willing to do and the owners are willing to or they want to not lose more money, um or whatever. So there will be a deal. I just wonder what the long-term ramifications are. Is it going to be worth everything that you get in the CBA from your side, for each side, to have that going forward? Because not only are the owners going to start saying it, it's going to affect the players going out to the markets. Like when you say, hey, I'm out here, I want this much money, like da 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 da, and then the owners are going to be like, well, we just can't afford to pay you guys now. Like it's going to affect. And I think that's my real disappointment, is that we had the momentum back. We went through this. And I think going in, I was hopeful that, hey, we just went through one of the worst things to ever happen to the game of baseball with the season and how much money it lost and everything. And then we should know that we can't allow that to happen again. And let's build off the momentum. And we're not going to get that. It's
yeah.
shown that that's already blown past. And I think that's the real disappointment I've had with everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, let's hope that both sides are able to get together again. And I think if they had another week of what they've been going through this week, they could probably get to something. It's just a matter of it's a matter of, honestly, I think that there needs to be a drastic change, like I mentioned earlier, with a potential like salary cap with a high floor type thing. Like something's going to happen that is completely new structure.
That
Because honestly, in a year or in 5 years when this agreement's up, they're going to be right back in the same spot again under this current like thing. So something needs to change.
the I mean that the hard cap thing, that's never going to happen. That
Well,
nobody
I
will agree to that
agree.
one. But
I agree, but I think it would help both sides if it did. Like, I mean,
um,
that's just from a matter, just math wise. Like, I think it would be
imagine
good for both sides, but it won't happen.
you said it. If they had another like 7 to 10 days, they'd get it done. Imagine if they had 43 more days. How much
Well,
they'd
yeah,
be able to
I
get
mean,
done, huh?
and they could have done it. They could have
That's
been doing it during the season. I mean, that it's like, but
yeah, they could have. So, anyways, we've talked probably a lot more on this one, but I think that we were really hoping that come today we were going to have some sort of good news to be able to talk about, and it's been more of a like a rant laden episode so far. But um you know today was kind of a final straw for a lot of people. And I think that it just stuff needs to be said from each side. And a lot of people aren't going to, especially through the reporters and the media, they're not going to, say a lot of what needs to be said, at least. So I know our reach doesn't do much, but at least it makes us feel better about it. So, but let's go ahead and move on to looking at each of our favorite players from each NL team. And we will start in the National League East, and we'll start with your Atlanta Braves.
Yeah, so a much lighter note here, but we're gonna let's shed some light on some players. Looking at the Braves, obviously I'm a Braves fan, so every Braves player is my favorite player. But I am gonna go with Tyler Matzik because I think it's really cool. And one of the toughest things in sports is to come back from something like the yips. And Tyler Matzik had a major case of the yips, and the ability to come back and to not just turn into a useful pitcher at the big league level, but to turn into one of the most clutch pitchers at the big league level and in the postseason and in a World Series run. It's really incredible for a guy who had the mental issues on the mound that he had. So it just kind of my respect for Tyler Matzik just went through the roof this year, and I really like him. I think he's a great pitcher and one of my favorites in the whole game. So
Yeah, I ended up going with Austin Riley. Now, if we could pick your previous teams, I would have went with Freddie Freeman, obviously, or previous free agent signings this year. I tried to avoid those, but Austin Riley was a guy that he had a lot of talent, and then he really struggled when he first came up in his first 2 years, um, in 2019 and 2020. And then I was talking to one of our other friends who happens to be a Braves fan as well, and I told him, I was like, if you just let Riley get comfortable, like he will break out and he'll be one of your best players. And he really proved that this year. Came out in 160 games, had 33 homers, 107 RBIs, 303. I mean, had one of the best seasons. I mean, he was a legit MVP candidate for most of the season. And he was just a guy I've always believed in as a prospect. And I knew eventually he would be great. And it's just been fun for me to watch his rise up from struggling, being that young player that struggles to really taking that next leap. So that's kind of why Austin Riley is my favorite Atlanta Braves player at the moment, is just because I've seen him take this step, and he's somebody I've always believed in. So, but looking over at the Philadelphia Phillies, I ended up picking first on this one, and I ended up going with Bryce Harper, MV Harper, however you want to say it. I think he's one of the most underrated players in the game. A lot of people want to say he's overrated nowadays, and I just don't think that that's the case. I think Bryce Harper has been so damn good for so long. He did have his little weak spells in there, but I just don't think. I think people hate the personality that he showed more, and how brash he was as a young player, and they don't understand and really grasp how much he's kind of matured and how much of a great player he's really turned into.
yeah, I think one funny thing about Bryce Harper is you mentioned the fact that he's people call him or that he's kind of underrated now. He was overrated for a long time because people were saying he was Mike Trout, and he went from people started calling him overrated so often they became acting like he wasn't good, and now he's underrated. So it's kind of
Yeah.
funny. But my pick for the Phillies was Zach Wheeler. I had a little bit of a hard time picking for the Phillies, but Zach Wheeler's a guy who has struggled with his injuries in the past, and he's kind of reworked himself and come back from injuries, which is very difficult to do, especially the injuries he had, like Tommy John, and worked himself into a borderline, or what could have been the Cy Young candidate this year, and in the future looks like a guy who could be there again. So Zach Wheeler did a great job kind of reworking himself and coming back from injuries, and that's pretty cool. So good for Zach Wheeler. But the next team we have here, and I got to pick first here, which was good, is the New York Mets. And I went with Jacob DeGrom because there's nobody more dominant in this game than Jacob DeGrom or really, honestly, I don't know if there's anybody more dominant in sports right now than Jacob DeGrom at their craft. The guy is just insanely good. He's the most talented pitcher in the game. Throws that hard fastball, and his breaking stuff is incredible. And not only that, but he's smart. He knows what he's doing, and he's just a great pitcher in general. So, Jacob DeGrom is a guy, and I like his attitude on the mound. He's always real poised, and he's fired up. He never wants to come out of the game. I mean, he's definitely my favorite player on the Mets.
So, are you a short-haired Degrom guy or are you a long-haired Degrom guy?
Doesn't matter.
Oh, okay, thought that would help sway the vote a little bit there, but I ended up going with Francisco Lindor since you took Jacob DeGrom and crushed my dreams. But Francisco Lindor, he had a really down season this year, but he for a long time in Cleveland was known as the Mr. Smiles, the guy who had one of the biggest smiles and brightest smiles all around, and um, he just has been a guy who I've enjoyed watching. Like, he doesn't do any one thing flashy. He's just really good at everything. And he's just somebody that you can respect. I mean, did really well for Cleveland. Helped lead them to a World Series for the first time in a long time. And then they got to the point where they couldn't afford him and they traded him to the Mets. But um, Lindor, one of the best shortstops. I think he's fallen down the ranking a little bit because you've just seen guys grow, but there was a time where he could have argued be the best shortstop in the game, and he's just been fun to watch for a long time for me. So Frankie Lindor is my favorite player off the Mets, but looking over to the Miami Marlins now, I went with another young player who has a lot of energy and is working his way up still, but that's Jazz Chisholm. A guy who I think could be an absolute future star. He just needs to work on a little bit more plate discipline, but the character he is off the field and his Twitter game is amazing as well, which just helps me like him even more. But the energy he plays with on the field and the dynamic player that he has shown flashes to be is just really fun to see. And you'll notice the trend. I pick a lot of fun players to watch, and that's just because um, it's a more of a joy watching them. And I know that's really sounds stupid because it's fun, but obviously.
Yeah, no doubt. I look at for the Marlins. I have a few players I like there. I thought about picking Sandy Alcantara and or Pablo Lopez, but I picked Miguel Rojas. I think it's really cool that he kind of went from being a kind of afterthought and with the Dodgers to really being kind of the heart and soul of the Marlins. And I think he's got a pretty underrated game. He's got a great glove at shortstop, and he hits a lot better than people think. He's not really a power guy, but he's been able to put together a couple of pretty decent seasons at the plate, close to league average, and I think he's pretty underrated for that reason. And I mean, he's just kind of a player that has worked his butt off to become a pretty good player, and he's got a good personality. People seem to like him, so I think he's a pretty cool player to pull for, and he's probably one of my favorites on the Marlins. But moving on to the next team, which is the Washington Nationals, I actually went with a guy who not too many people know about, but Yadiel Hernandez. He's a guy who was a journeyman minor leaguer who spent like a lot of time in the minor leagues, and he finally got called up at age 34 to the big leagues for the first time, and he's made the most of it. He's really stuck at the big league level and done a pretty solid job there, so that's pretty cool. And I think it's always fun to see a player who has gone from for so long without being able to get a shot at the big leagues to finally getting that shot and make the most of it. So I picked him.
Yeah, and then on this one, you made it really easy for me to just go ahead and go with Juan Soto, one of the best young players in baseball, one of the best players in baseball in general. Um, the type of hitter that he is, the all around hitter that he is at such a young age, is still just 23 years old. The eye he has at the plate is insane. Like, the pitches that he could take, you see some of the best players in the world just whiff at and completely miss, and he just stands there like it didn't even affect him. And you very rarely see him get beat on anything. He is always able to find the way to put the bat on the ball, and he can hit for power. And his defense isn't as great as his offensive production, but man, it's just I can't wait to see what he looks like in 10 years when he's at 33 and the stats that he's been able to accomplish up until that point, and see where he's at, because I think there is a legit chance that he is one of the all-time great hitters that we're seeing, and going to be at least one of the best in our generation for sure. But
Uh,
we're good.
I was gonna say absolutely. I mean, he's a player that's easy to like, and I think you look at him as just that talent is incredible. So
Yeah, and then looking, jumping over to the NL Central, and we're going to start with the Milwaukee Brewers there. And if you've listened to this podcast for a long time, you will know that I am going to go easily with Corbin Burns here, and that's just from the fact of that I faced him one time when I was in high school. He made me look like an absolute fool at the plate, and then he's from the Bakersfield area. And went to Centennial High School, so it's have a personal connection with Corbin Burns, and the hatred that he made me feel as a high school freshman or whatever when he was going to be a draft prospect to being a major leaguer, making major league hitters look how he made me look as a freshman. It's been pretty fun to see, so I don't feel as bad now.
Yeah, I went with Brandon Woodruff, and honestly, he's a guy that I think is not talked about enough. He's been overshadowed by Corbin Burns this year, and he's really been fantastic for the last 3 years. And he doesn't seem to get talked about enough as an ace. And I think he's a great pitcher. And Brandon Woodruff is, I mean, he's almost as good as Corbin Burns. I mean, he's not as good as Corbin Burns, but he's not that far off of him. So it's pretty cool to watch him become what he's become. And I mean that one too. It's at the top of that rotation. It's unbelievable. But speaking of really good starting pitchers, the next team we have on our list is the St. Louis Cardinals, and my pitcher or player I picked for them is Adam Wainwright. And I really like Wainwright. The fact that he was able to at age 39 last year
Yeah.
do what he did and kind of rework himself and keep pitching at the long with the longevity that he's been able to pitch with is really really cool. The fact that he's stuck in the game and it shows how much he loves playing the game. And I also thought he was a really good personality when he got a shot in the TV booth in the playoff a couple years ago. So I really like Wainwright, and I look forward to seeing him move into a role where we hear a lot from him in the in the booth eventually after, because I think that'll end up being a role for him. He seemed really good at it, and it seemed like he enjoyed it. So Adam Wainwright's a good player, and on another note, I wish he had not been traded from the Braves because he would have been a really nice piece to have there. So Adam Wainwright's he's my favorite on the Cardinals.
Yeah, looking at the Cardinals, it was a team that I kind of did struggle to pick one guy from. I think there was like about 3 or 4 guys I could have easily chosen, but I ended up going with Paul Goldschmidt, a guy who is well known for his time at Arizona and being in the Dodgers division. I was able to watch him for so long, and I think he's more criminally underrated for how good of a player he really was. I mean, if you look at that stretch from 2013 really through 2018, his lowest weighted runs created on the year or on out of those years was 133. And he plays really good defense. He or Not really good defense. Sorry. He's a really good base runner. He's just a really good hitter. He, for first baseman, being able to steal 30 bags one year in 2016, but he's always a threat to get close to that 20 stolen base mark. And then when he got traded to St. Louis, there was people thought, in 2019 he really struggled, and then 2020 he got, he bounced back, and then 2021 he's just right back to the old Paul Goldschmidt again at the age of 34. So it's really been fun to see him throughout his career, and then to continue to being good even after he got traded from from a place where he gave so much. But looking over to the Cincinnati Reds, that's the next team we went to. I ended up going with starting pitcher Tyler Mahle, young guy who is just kind of starting to break into his own. Had a really good year this year with a 3.75 ERA, a 3.80 FIP, and 3.74 xFIP. Had a good 2020 as well, so it was really good to see that he was able to carry that over to a full season. Pitched 180 innings this year. There's not one thing that I really like jumps off the page to Mahle about me. It's just he's one of those guys that just has some random thing that I really got connected to one day watching a game, and just have really been able to follow him ever since. And whenever he's on the mound, it's a guy who I really want to tune in and watch for some reason. So Tyler Mahle was my pick for the Cincinnati Reds.
Yeah, he threw a perfect game in the minor leagues, I believe. Um,
Oh, I didn't
looking
know
at
that.
I think he did. I think he was the Reds pitcher that did a few years ago. But looking at the Reds, I could have gone with some different guys. I like Castillo and and Sonny Gray. But I think the easy pick for me was Votto. Votto is just a really fun player because of he's got a really interesting personality, and the fact that he is such a finely tuned hitter, the way he's done, the way he approaches hitting is really fun. I think that there were some years where he was like, okay, I'm never swinging at a pitch outside the strike zone, and he ends up like walking like 20% of the time and never striking out. And then there's the year like I'm just never going to strike out, just doesn't strike out. And then you have like this year where he's like, okay, I'm not really doing that well anymore. I guess my bat's slowing down, so I'm going to start swinging a little bit more, and I'm going to start hitting home runs. And then he starts hitting home runs. Like it's really fun to watch Joey Votto kind of do whatever he wants to do. So he's kind of my pick for the Reds. But looking forward to the next team. There were a lot of players that had a lot of personality on the Cubs, but they traded a lot of guys off last year. So there's not too many guys with a lot of popularity left. But the one I decided to go with was Keegan Thompson. He's a young pitcher for them, and he's a fun guy for me personally because of he played at Auburn while I was in school there, and it was a lot of fun to watch him pitch every other day or every few days. He was a guy that he had good stuff. Obviously, he's had good enough stuff to get to the big leagues. But the most fun thing about him was that he just attacked. He tried to never walk anybody, and he was head of a rotation at Auburn that had him and Casey Mize together. And also Davis Daniel, who's a prospect for the Angels. They had three really, really good pitchers in their rotation. It was a lot of fun to watch Keegan Thompson come out there on Friday nights in the SEC and develop. And then after being like a third or fourth round pick, see him get up to the big leagues and have some limited success there to the point of being able to stay on the roster for this coming up year is pretty fun to watch. So I went ahead and went with Keegan Thompson.
So the Cubs for me was a team that I really struggled to find somebody. If you had asked me last year, I would have been able to tell you Chris Bryant very easily would have been my favorite player on the Cubs. But we all have talked about their exodus of players at the trade deadline and that. So it was really hard going through the people of who I really wanted to pick. And I didn't want to pick like brand new free agents. Or people you hadn't really seen in a uniform before, but this was one instance where I'm going to break my own rule and give myself a little mulligan. And I ended up going with Nick Madrigal, a guy who the Cubs acquired at the trade deadline from the Chicago White Sox for Craig Kimbrell. And we haven't been able to see him because he had a season-ending injury, but he's just a guy who he doesn't hit for much power, but he doesn't hit the ball even particularly hard, but he's one of those super fast players that just like a blooper can get you a double and a single thing that would get into the gap for most people and be a double that would get cut off before even the warning track turns into a triple for him. So just seeing a guy who he doesn't have all the power but has that insane speed and be able to use that to his advantage. And hopefully he stays healthy because I also have him on my fantasy baseball team for Dynasty. So I'd very much like a great Nick Madrigal career. But we'll go ahead and look at the Pittsburgh Pirates next. And mine is going to be a little bit of a weirder one here, and that's going to be Yoshi Tsutsugo. I could have easily gone with Brian Reynolds, but Tsutsugo, before he actually got traded or went to the Pirates this past year in the middle of the season and really had a good end to the 2021 season. He was on the Dodgers for a little bit. He was a guy I originally wanted them to get when he was coming over from overseas. I get it mixed up if he was in the KBO or if he was in the MPB. But he was a guy I really wanted then. He ended up going to the Tampa Bay Rays. And then when the Rays DFA'd him, he came to the Dodgers. He didn't have much success with LA, but the character that he was and seeing how the teammates really interacted with him and the way that even though the language barrier was really there, how he just had so much fun and was able to, bring a different energy that they had been missing for a year or so. Was really fun to see. So Yoshi Tsutsugo was my favorite player from the Pittsburgh Pirates.
That's pretty cool. Not a guy that too many people kind of think about, but another guy that people probably do think about with the Pirates, if they ever think about the Pirates, is Brian Hayes, and he's a guy that I like watching. He's really entertaining. He plays really good defense at third base. He can hit. a guy who has potential star written all over him. He has struggled with some injuries, but he's one of those kind of up and comers that are really, really going to be fun to watch if they can stay healthy. This coming up season, if we have a season. So, he's a guy that I'm definitely keeping my eye on, and I'll, if I tune into the Pirates, he'll be one of the ones to watch. But moving on, one more division here. We got the NL West, and the Giants are the next team on our list. And my pick for the Giants is Logan Webb. I don't really know why, except for the fact that I think he's a guy that he doesn't have the best stuff, but he really has figured out how to use it correctly. And I think it's really telling when a guy who's I guess he was technically not a rookie, but when he can come out in the playoffs against a team that was the wildly favored World Series champion and deal the way he did twice, it's pretty incredible. And it was a lot of fun to watch, and it really made me gain a lot of respect for Logan Webb. So I went and picked him for the Giants.
Yeah, so for the Giants, I decided to pick absolutely nobody because I cannot stand the Giants. But no, I ended up going with Alex Wood, kind of like the least of the worst Giants because at least he has a Dodgers connection and actually a Braves connection as well. So we were both connected with Alex Wood, but he's a guy who, he's well known for having that funky release. Came over to the Dodgers, I believe it was mid-season of 2015, and he pitched really well for them, especially that 2017 season where it was, I believe it was his all-star year, had a 2.72 ERA, and just one of those guys who, he didn't overpower you with stuff. He just had that funky kind of movement to his pitches because of the weird arm angle that he was coming at, and um, just was always awkward. It seemed like, but got the job done. And then he ended up getting traded to Cincinnati, came back to the Dodgers, was a part of the World Series team, and then he went to the Giants this past year and was pretty good as well. So Alex Wood was my favorite San Francisco Giant if I had to pick one. And then looking at my team, the Los Angeles Dodgers, I ended up going with Cody Bellinger just because I can't pick Clayton Kershaw right here. But Bellinger is another guy who really struggled this year, but he had, he won his MVP a couple years ago. And I just something about the way that he had played that immediately, made him one of my favorite players. I didn't know if it was just the way how much power he showed or just the defense, but just something about Bellinger that really just caught my eye from the first time, and hearing as him as a prospect that even when he's playing down, and I could pick a handful of players from the Dodgers, but Bellinger was a pretty easy second selection for me.
Yeah, so for the Dodgers, I don't know why, as a Dodgers fan, you picked the worst player on your own team, but anyways, I'm
Listen
gonna
here,
pick
okay? Listen here.
I'm gonna pick Justin Turner. I think he's a really cool story after really struggling with the Mets, that he was able to rework his swing and just become a really consistently good player for the Dodgers. I really like his game. He can kind of do everything at the plate, and he played a good third base until he's kind of struggling a little bit more now than he ever has because of his age. But he's also, it seems like a good guy, and he's a good team leader, and I think that's always something to look at with a guy. I like Justin Turner. And then moving on to the Padres, um, it was I had a kind of a tough time picking for the Padres too, but Jerkson Profar was a guy that I decided to go with. It says a lot to me about somebody's mentality when they, have the amount of injuries he had, and it causes him to fall from being like a top prospect and being, like literally the number one prospect in baseball, have all the expectations he had, and to fall off to the level of really basically being a journeyman, and then to kind of turn it around to a point of being able to stick with the Padres and sign a decently sized contract. I think that was really cool that Jerkson Profar was able to stick around and do that. So good on him, and he was my pick for the Padres.
Yeah, so the Padres, I want to like a guy like Fernando Tatis until he just absolutely murders the Dodgers for every game that he decides to play them. So it's very hard for me to make him my favorite player from the Padres. Machado was a consideration, even though they've had some bad blood with LA. I'd always liked him when he was with Baltimore, but I ended up going with Will Myers. And kind of my story with Will Myers goes back to when he was getting traded for James Shields and everything. I was highly convinced that Will Myers was going to be like an MVP and one of the best players ever. I don't know why, but I was. And I stuck by that for a long time, and he's never produced to that level, but he still had a decent career. And I've just kind of followed him everywhere he's went because I was hoping the one day he'd have that breakout and prove me right, even though I should be on old takes exposed at this moment for that. But looking at the Colorado Rockies, I went with Ryan McMahon, another guy who don't really have much of a backstory about to why he was my favorite or is my favorite player for a certain team. Just I've always thought that his left-handed swing was one of the nicer left-handed swings, one of the prettiest swings in baseball to me at least. And playing in Colorado, I was convinced or am that he can be some sort of a really good player. He started 2021 with as that type of player, and then tailed off towards the second half. So maybe just needs to get used to that everyday role, and maybe 2022, if we have a season, will be his breakout.
Yeah, so for the Rockies, I went with Herman Marquez. I talk about him a pretty good bit, but he's one of those pitchers that I feel like if he was not in Coors, he would be like an absolute stud ace for somebody. And he's a guy that he's criminally underrated just because of where he plays. And I mean, the fact that he's been able to put up the numbers he has in Coors is just goes to show how good he is. And I wish the Rockies would get their heads out of their butts and go ahead and trade him because obviously he's not going to be part of a contending team there, and they could probably get a lot in return for him for when they do have a contending team. So, but I'd love to see what he could do somewhere else. But for now, he's my favorite player on the Rockies. And then moving on to the final team we got here, which is the Arizona Diamondbacks. My player I picked was Bumgarner, who I guess it's kind of a weird one to pick, but a lot of people don't like him. But I've always, for whatever reason, thought it was kind of cool that for one thing, his ability to hit was kind of fun to watch, but the fact that he was kind of like this just tough, like not didn't care what people thought about him type guy. I thought that was kind of fun. Some of his antics about staring down people who, showed him up or whatever, like I didn't like that much. But, I take that back. I did like that because it showed that he had a lot of passion for how he did, and that it bothered him when he did bad. So, I don't want somebody out there start throwing baseballs at people or starting fights, but it was fun to watch him. He'd always get pissed off when he would make a mistake and somebody would hit a home run off him or something. And I always thought that was, something that was kind of cool. And I don't know, Bumgarner always kind of was a guy that I kind of liked for that reason. So
The stare down with Joe West was the absolute greatest moment of Bumgarner's career in my
that was pretty
eyes.
great. That was pretty
Um,
great.
but for to wrapping up, the NL favorite player teams were on my side for the Diamondbacks. I went with Ketel Marte, probably the easy pick for the Diamondbacks to be honest, but I always enjoy those stories like you, kind of how you were saying, guy who had kind of struggled and then was able to rework himself. When he first came up with the Mariners in 2015, he had a good year, 57 games. And then in 2016, he really struggled. And then the Mariners traded him to the Diamondbacks. I believe that was in the Taijuan Walker, like Mitch Haniger deal. Gene Segura was in that as well. And he really struggled his first year in Arizona. And then in 2018, he kind of bounced to the 2015 kind of person, not as good, but not quite as bad as the 2 years before. And then in 2019, he really took that massive step. He went from being basically around a 260 hitter to hitting 330, getting on base 39% of the time, 32 homers. And then in 2020, he was battling some injuries that kind of zapped his power a little bit. And then in 2021, he bounced back to being not quite the same power numbers as that, but being that all around better hitter. I mean, he hit almost 320 this year. So it was just one of those guys who would really struggled and got traded to a team, even struggled there, but then finally found his way and went back. Went to being a really good player, not even just a good player. He went to being a really good to even great player. Even for a team like the Diamondbacks, who don't have much talent on that team right now. Most people can usually pitch around Marte, and he's still finding a way to be, productive, at least in that, um, in that lineup or whatever. And there's a guy, there's a chance he could get traded here soon, and maybe he gets traded to a bigger team and he can make a bigger impact there. But it's been fun watching Marte, and hopefully he gets traded here soon so he can have a chance to win, because he probably deserves it.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, that will pretty much wrap up this episode, and looking at the NL player or NL team's favorite players, and then our CBA talks. Hopefully, we have a lot better news by the time we're talking to you next time. I'm highly skeptical of that, but you never know. It only takes one meeting, one person to really step up and make the first move and swing for the fence. And once that happens, it could be a snowball, from there, and get done really quick. So hopefully we have that by the next episode, and we're done talking about the cancellation of regular season games, and we can look at free agency and trade market getting ready in spring training. But well, I highly doubt that that's going to happen, and we're going to have to find some stuff to talk about here soon. But anything you want to wrap up on?
I think that's pretty much it. Just I'm holding out hope as well. But I mean, as someone who was really optimistic for a while, when this didn't happen, when they had a deadline for it, I think it's gonna be a while. So we'll see. But I'm not super excited. But we'll see. You never know. So, but we'll in the meantime find some good baseball content to talk about, and hopefully keep y'all entertained. And it's going to take a lot of hard work from the hardcore fans like us to to keep people interested in baseball, and to keep the train rolling, since apparently the owners and players don't especially want to do that. So
Yeah. So that's going to wrap up this episode. Before we leave again, I would encourage you guys, if you can, if possible, check out the YouTube. It's at the Bat Flip Podcast. Instagram as well. We're starting over there, but really I want to start pushing that YouTube. And then here in the future, once we start building that up a little bit, we're going to look into doing some streaming as well, doing some live stream, maybe doing question and answers, or maybe doing live episodes to where people can jump in and listen there. But I'm really trying to push that. So if you guys would go check that out, go check out the Instagram, even the Twitter, if you can. Just help us build it, and we very much appreciate it. So thank you guys for listening to this episode of the Bat Flip Podcast, and we'll catch you guys next week.
thanks, everybody.